It is, I think, an exceedingly dark day, and I believe that what we have before us is a coup d'etat, a coup by the executive of this country to seize power. Power which the Constitution says is power to be exercised by the Parliament, not by the executive, not by the President, but by these bodies conjointly. And we today find ourselves in a situation where an executive faced by a series of scandals, each of which would have brought down a government in any democratic state, indeed in anywhere in this country. Any single one of the actions that we have been considering over the last 2 years would have brought down governments, and indeed have brought down governments in this region. And yet today, in a cowardly bid to avoid the heat that is the result of their misdemeanors, the government has sought to use powers within the Constitution to deny this House an ability to exercise the sanction which the Constitution has enshrined for the legislature. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a couple of observations about the importance of the no confidence motion. But before that, let me say that we should not be disheartened. We should look forward. And as the last speaker says, our colleague and brother, the Honorable Mr. Nagamutu, we are not without tools at our disposal. First of all of the motions, including the motions of censure, the motions of privilege, will and should be brought back by this Assembly as soon as the President exercises the options which are available to him in the Constitution, and that is to recall the House. Whenever this House comes back, it will take up those issues which have been put in the freezer. In the meantime, Mr. Speaker, since this government has, by its action, sought to buy time for itself, and one has to ask, what is it they're going to do with this time? They are to use the time, really, to continue to fill the pockets of their associates and colleagues. The individuals and businesses, Chinese nationals, Indian nationals, PPP associates, who they will give, whether it's broadcasting licenses, gold mining licenses, land grants, and the like. We, Mr. Speaker, I believe, ought to ensure that we will not honor any of those obligations. Let the international agencies and the foreigners and responsible corporate entities based in Guyana know that they are in the presence of a pariah of a government, and for as long as the government has that status, any agreement that the government signs with them will be reopened by us. I remember, Mr. Speaker, in 1991, 1992, when we were trying, with the assistance of an economic recovery program, to privatize companies and indeed do many of the things which in 1989, when this House insisted that the opposition and government discuss the structural adjustment program, and we had such discussions led by Dr. Jagan, he was still, although he could not persuade us that he had better proposals, although he was persuaded indeed of the proposal, the validity of the proposal, he still went out and announced that they would reopen contracts and agreements. I'm happy to say that notwithstanding the reopening of those, they have stood even under a PPP government. Do you know why? Because they were implemented not with the type of fraud misdemeanors associated with the current agreements, but because they were properly negotiated and implemented. We know there's no transparency associated with the agreements from which the government is hiding. We know that. And therefore, let those persons who are seeking to get benefit from a government that is improperly appropriating powers that are not its own, let them be warned. Yeah. Let them be warned. Mr. Speaker, the thing is that a no confidence motion is not laid against the government normally for a single act. And I want to emphasize this. We are not looking at a situation in which the government has merely found an attorney general who pronounces and behaves as a miscreant, almost. We are not merely looking at a situation in which he admits to having utilized resources which were not properly his own. We are not only looking at a situation in which an attorney general charged with advising the government to stay within the law. That is the main function of an attorney general. He it is alone whose responsibility is to advise that cabinet to keep within the boundaries of the law and to ensure that he does not allow them to, if you like, imperil the executive. We have a situation in which the pronouncements suggest that this Attorney General has been or is in the process of threatening persons exercising democratic rights which this government fought for and claimed to be the defender of, and in office was supposed to be the defender of. That's one case. Immediately prior, this is 2 Tuesdays ago. 2 Tuesdays ago, these revelations were made in relation to the activities of the Attorney General. That's one. That is bad enough. But we've had a number of others. The Honorable Moses Nagamutu mentioned the case of the Minister of Finance. But you have a situation in which the government, the President, Mr. Speaker, the President himself, has taken upon himself powers which are not his. The Constitution does give the President a right to not assent to bills that are passed and properly passed by this House. Nowhere, however, does the Constitution give him the right to decide, as he has done, as he has said publicly, that he will not pass bills unless those bills have the imprimatur of he and his cabinet. Unless a bill originates with a PPP MP, it is not to be passed in this House. He's gone further than that, Mr. Speaker. He has not only refused to assent to bills, properly passed by this House, and bills passed by a majority, but even bills that are unanimously passed by this House, he has not signed. That is against the spirit and the letter of the Constitution. There is a bill before the President, passed in 2013, which today remains unsigned. And this is the Constitutional Amendment Bill, which seeks to correct a constitutional conflict between the Fiscal Management Accountability Act of 2003 and the Constitution. The President has not even deigned to acknowledge receipt, let alone to provide an explanation as to why he has not signed the bill. I am sure, and I have checked several times with the clerk, no such response has come from the President. And this, Mr. Speaker, is improper. It is against the Constitution. As regards the other elements, and there are many others, I don't want to list all of them. we have a situation in which the president has also signed bills. He has signed into an act, the appropriation bills of 2012, 2013 and 2014. And in the case of the 2013 appropriation bill, notwithstanding the fact, 2012, notwithstanding the fact that he has signed the bill into law, he has had his Attorney General challenge the bill in the courts. He has furthermore, and you can say he has a right, okay, so you don't think the bill is constitutional, you challenge it in the court. But at the same time, he has spent money. He has spent the money from a bill which he regards as unconstitutional. He has spent the monies approved, and he has spent monies which have not been approved. You can't have it both ways. You cannot have it both ways. If the act is illegal, you should not be spending from it. You have a number of elements in these appropriation acts which the president has authorized his cabinet to spend against. And one of the things we have to do when we reconvene, Mr. Speaker, under your chairmanship, to deal with this government, is to bring these matters before the courts. Bring the minister and the other minister responsible before a court to account for these breaches of both the laws as set out in the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act, drafted and implemented by this government itself, as well as by the Constitution. The Constitution, Article 217, is clear. No expenditure can take place, should take place, without first having the authority of the Parliament. And the other articles to which the President and his minister are fond of making reference are not to be interpreted in isolation. They have to be done conjointly. So, Mr. Speaker, what I'm really saying is that no government finds itself subject to a no confidence vote on the basis of one simple misstep. It is not the consequence of a misstep. We are reacting, in a sense, to a series of deliberate, contemptuous, and almost contemptible acts against our Constitution. And when I say, Mr. Speaker, that this is a coup d'etat, I mean that because you have a government. This is what we're looking at. You have a government, and I take the opportunity, yes, I take the opportunity to remind you, Mr. Speaker, many people thought when I spoke on the budget of 2014 that maybe I was too mild. I wasn't focusing on what was going on. If I remind you, Mr. Speaker, the entire content of the budget presentation that I made called upon the government to pay attention to the fact that it was a minority. And in order for the financial bills associated with the budget to survive, they needed to pay attention to cooperating with the other members of the House, which happen to be a majority. And you cannot, Mr. Speaker. Democracy has two elements. One is about one man, one vote. One woman, one vote. And that is what brings members into a parliament. Okay, that's one side. And the government seems to feel that that is the only side that matters. Once you are appointed into the House, whether or not you have the largest block of votes or you're a majority, doesn't matter. You have the presidency, you can do whatever you like. But there's a second element to democracy within the Westminster-type constitution that we have. And that is within the House, decisions are made only by a majority. Decisions are made either by a simple majority, whether it is 1 or 40. Decisions are made by consensus, preferably. Many places that happens. Or decisions are made on the basis of unanimous support for measures. All of that has occurred here. And notwithstanding that, the government has taken it upon itself, even when decisions are unanimous, not to implement them. That is the thing, Mr. Speaker. That is the scandal. It's taken it upon itself itself not to implement them. What does that mean? It means that you have the presidency regarding itself as higher than the Constitution. Higher than the Constitution. So if the president doesn't like the MPs who initiated the motion, notwithstanding the fact it's a unanimous decision, they don't implement them. And what that implies is this, that the public has decided, one man, one vote, to provide the power of decision making to a majority in the House. The government has decided, notwithstanding the fact that it represents a minority, only what it decides must pass. That is not democracy. That is not what is enshrined in the Constitution. It is not what is enshrined in the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. You cannot be a minority and behave as though you are a majority. So you are a minority and you want to say, this is our budget, this is our bill, they must be passed. They must be passed. We don't have the votes, but they must be passed. You go to the public because you believe that the Guyanese public is ignorant, because you believe that the nuances of the complexity, for example, of the difference between the responsibilities of the clerk, the responsibilities of the speaker, the responsibilities of the president versus the responsibilities of the House, because you believe you can confuse people with those subtleties, because you believe that people are so stupid they wouldn't understand them. You now try to mask all of this by, in effect, seeking a minority rule. That is what it is about. That is what it's about. Bullyism, in fact. Yes, thank you very much. So you have a minority, and the minority demands the right of us to be able to do whatever it is they want, notwithstanding what the majority takes. What nonsense is this? Have our parents protested 1940, 1918, 1924, 1930s, 1953 and elsewhere. People have been shot in this country. People have been killed by police and soldiers, not only sugar workers, all types of workers. All ethnicities have been murdered in this country by colonial authorities, police, PPP authorities even, in pursuit of the defense of our rights. One man, one vote. And here we find a cabal, as Clive Thomas calls them, and a colleague is reminding me, criminalized in a criminalized state, demanding the rights that we have fought for so long, demanding to be able to take away our rights, exercise them, and be contemptuous of us. In the face of rights of a majority in this House, the government can tell us that they are going to prorogue Parliament so that we can cool off. So that we can cool off, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have, as I say, a series of issues before us. They are all important. And if the government wants anti-money laundering to pass, and it wants a budget that gives to a president, gives to a former president, income above and beyond that provided by the Constitution. Income which the Constitution already provides for in abundance. The president, the former president's income is already generous compared to that of judges. It is already generous, Mr. Speaker. The Constitution provides that alone. Superannuation and the pension. And that president added allowances which are unlimited. Allowances which are unlimited. And I remind my colleagues, because some of them believe, Mr. Speaker, that we are overdoing it. The benefits are unlimited. Even the adoption of children after a man has left the presidency is unlimited. And there are people out there getting $10,000, having to stand up and humiliate themselves. Humiliate themselves. When ministers and their associates spend those sorts of money and set them off against allowances for ministries which are not properly audited in any sense. So some Some have anything they want, and the majority have to punish and prostrate themselves around the country in order to get what are their rights. And ministers who themselves are disgraced, misappropriating government funds, admittedly, they are handing out money to people. They are doing us favors as though their father's money is our money. It's taxpayers' money. We are not here to prostrate ourselves before the PPP cabal, men who are often very, very close, if they're not on the wrong side of the boundaries of lawful and criminal activities. But that is what the government seems to be calling upon us to do. I see in a paper today, Mr. Speaker, that we are supposed, after cooling off, after the reset, to engage in consultations.
No way.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, I'm not in a position to make even the recommendations on that. But I would say that as far as those proposals are concerned, the government may find it useful to first consider remedying all the list of misdemeanors that I've mentioned, as well as fixing by way of invoking the legal powers at their disposal, those ministers that we have mentioned as breaking the law, and those who are currently, and whose examination of whose activities we are proposing to re-examine as soon as we come back. Mr. Speaker, you know, again, this question of the no confidence motion, it has some interesting origins. The case of King Charles I is an interesting one. I know that you are familiar with the history from which this constitution derives its origins. And when Charles prorogued his parliament in 1929, I don't think he had anticipated the route on which he was setting out. Charles I, of course, was the short king who lost his head. He lost his head directly as a result of the proroguing and the activities that followed from the proroguing, because he took all sorts of liberties, believing that he could play one side off against the other. Okay? So we are saying, Mr. Speaker, that this situation in which we find ourselves today is one that is undesirable. It casts a very dark and undesirable shadow over the country of Guyana, over our house, a house which has, I think, distinguished itself over the years in fighting for the rights of the poor and the downtrodden, for those who our societies had actually brought to their knees in many ways. And it is not conceivable that we on this side of the house can sit and reconvene and allow the government to wipe the slate clean, as though nothing has happened, none of the misdemeanors have been committed. We demand our rights, and we demand the respect for the Constitution. I thank you very much for that.
This act of prorogation occurred once before in our parliament, and that was in 2002. And on the 27th of November, the order was made to prorogue Parliament. And on the 27th of November, another order was made for Parliament to resume. In case you're not following me, what happened in that first prorogation was that there was no length of time spent during the prorogation. So it was a prorogation to move from this building to Ocean View. But in the history of Guyana, we have never had this type of prorogation that the PPP has perpetrated today. All of us know, all of us who grew up for the last 3 decades have been regaled with how bad this constitution, the 1980 constitution, is. even before the Constitution came into being, it was attacked as being a dictatorial constitution. It would create dictatorships and all of that. And comrades, we have lived to see President Cheney J. Gunn, President Janet J. Gunn, President John Dio, and now President Ramatar, hugging President Sam Hines, albeit for a few days too, hugging and embracing this constitution that they have reviled so much in the past. And so, I am saying to you today, it's for the first time that our constitution is being used to create a dictatorship. And it has occurred under the PPPC government. This is unprecedented, comrades. What do we have? We have a minority government embarking for the next 6 months on one-party rule. But we shouldn't be surprised, because this is the hallmark of Marxist-Leninists. The desire over the years is this is not a government of the people. This is a minority government, and what have they done? They have shut out the opposition majority. And this is not the opposition majority. This is the majority of all the Guyanese people in this country who voted against the PPP. And so if you could conceive a scheme to shut out the majority of the people, whilst you purport to govern without them, what's going to happen? When we are sitting in this parliament and we vote against your spending, and you still spend, comrades, what's going to happen in this 6 months without any scrutiny from us, without any opposition from us? What is going to happen with our coffers? What is going to happen with the people's money? What is going to be the fate of the people's money, comrades? Only we could prevent it. Only the representatives of the people and the people themselves could prevent what could happen if this government were allowed to remain 6 months in power without the supervision of the majority of the Guyanese people through this parliament. And let me say this, let's get things in context. This move has confirmed one thing, that the PPPC is afraid to go to the polls.
Absolutely.
They are afraid to confront the Guyanese people at the polls. They know that they will not succeed at any general or regional elections in this country. And why am I saying this? From the outset, the no confidence motion could only eventuate in the dissolution of the parliament. And the PPP responded by saying to us, well, we could dissolve before you and call a snap elections. In other words, the debate and discourse over the last several months has been who would call general elections first. And so lo and behold, out of the blue, the government comes not with snap elections by way of a dissolution by them first, but what happens now? They don't allow the motion to go, which would have also led to a dissolution. The only conclusion is they're not ready to go to any polls in this country. And we are more convinced now, more than ever, that they would suffer the licks of Lisbon at any election that So I am not despairing. I am not despairing, comrades. I am not. Because let's say they stay for 6 months, because the Constitution says they could stay for 6 months. What happens after the 6 months? They would actually come out and go to the election after 6 months. What is it they have in their mind? I saw the degraded Attorney General talking, but they don't intend to keep going doing it 6 months at the time till 2016. But why would he say that? Are they contemplating that this is a mechanism to get them to go to the end of the 2016 and the end of this term? Could we allow that in the first instance? funds of this country. And that is the issue we have to deal with. We have to juxtapose these issues against the failure of the government to conduct collective bargaining for the workers of this country, for the public servants of this country. They continue to have them on starvation wages, comrades.
Yes.
And then they go elsewhere and criticizing people about doing this and doing that. When for the last 14 years, they have refused to conduct and enter into collective bargaining agreements with the Guyana public service unions to ensure that there's a living wage for the public servants, which include all the policemen, all the civil servants in this country, teachers, nurses. That's what they prefer to do. And they do that when you know that if they put all of our money into the government account, the consolidated fund, there will be more than enough money to pay the workers of this country. So we have to ask ourselves, why is this government impoverishing the workers of this country? And now to add insult to injury, they have sidelined their representatives in the parliament. So this is a monumental crisis, and the world must know that Guyana has the first dictatorship in this region. It's the first time in the history of Guyana we will have minority rule of the majority. And we will not, and we cannot allow this to happen. And we must give leadership.
Yes.
I could pledge the leadership on the part of a partnership for national unity. And I know the AFC would get jealous, and they would pledge the leadership to the people too. And so we could guarantee the leadership that the country would get during this interregnum when they suspend this parliament. There's no choice. There's no way out. We're not signaling our tactics, and we're not signaling what we would do. But we would ensure that the PPP reconsider its decision to prorogue this parliament and hurry back to it, so that we can get on with the business of this country. The people want elections. The people, the theme in this country is for general elections, so there could be an opportunity of change in this government. Regime change, that's what people have in mind. And so when you decide to shun that aside and then perpetuate yourself in office alone to the exclusion of the majority, I would want to believe that you're looking for trouble from the people. The leader said already that the people are angry. And more when we explain to them when the government alone would run this country, what it would mean to them, I believe they will understand. They're not going to get any higher salaries. If they were to announce elections, they'd probably try to ramp it up from 5% to 8%. But we don't expect any benefits. When you have 1,600 graduates yesterday from the University of Guyana, high unemployment already exists in Guyana. High youth unemployment already exists in Guyana. Discrimination across the land. If you're not affiliated in PPP, you can't get work.
That's right.
That's right.
And so we're saying this to the PPP. Reconsider your decision. There shall be no dictatorship in this land of ours. So it will be a question of man or mouse. And who do you support, comrades? Man or mouse? Man. And so I wish to say, Mr. Speaker, that it's really a sad day for democracy. And let's hope that good sense prevails. They have a way of challenging you. They have a way of daring you. They have this thing of putting out something there to see how people would react. And if there's no reaction, they will allow it to run. And they will allow it to continue. And just as Nandalal was saying they won't want to happen, they believe that will happen. That it could keep adjourning for 6 months, suspended for 6 months, 6 months until 2016 comes around. Hoping that their chances for being re-elected would have increased by the unlawful spending and unsupervised spending of the people's money on their campaign. No to dictatorship, comrades! Done with one-party rule! Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
This is a dark day for democracy in Guyana. There are people on the street who are angry at what has occurred today, the 10th of November. They came expecting that when the reconvening of Parliament was postponed from the 10th of October, that there was some sincerity in using the date 10th of November for a day when we will be able to resume the people's business. Today, we are greeted with a proclamation. It is an affront to Guyanese, who almost exactly 3 years ago in November 2011 voted to give the majority of their votes to a Partnership for National Unity and the Alliance for Change. That is the heart of the problem. We have an executive branch, we have a government which for the last 3 years have not been able to come to grips with its minority status. President Ramatar has now single-handedly engineered the constitutional crisis. The main purpose of his proclamation is to allow the People's Progressive Party to avoid parliamentary scrutiny. It wants to avoid the no-confidence motion which was scheduled to be debated today. It wants to prevent the holding of local government elections. It wants to prevent debate on the financial excesses and impropriety of its ministers. It wants to protect the reputation of its ministers from parliamentary scrutiny and sanction. It wants to permit the PPP's election campaign to proceed unhindered. It wants to permit the continued expenditure of state funds without parliamentary scrutiny. It wants to establish a one-party state in this country. President Ramatar's proclamation to prorogue Parliament is a challenge to our entire people. He has no grounds for this crude smothering of parliamentary independence. The opposition will not accept this denial of democracy. And we will not be intimidated by the PPP's dictatorship. The opposition today, and I'm sure my colleagues in the Alliance for Change will speak for themselves, but we will resist this proclamation. We call on all the good people of Guyana to come out. We call on the churches and the masjids and the mandirs. We call on the trade unions. We call on the private sector organizations. We call on the non-governmental organizations to peacefully but determinedly resist the PPP's resort to dictatorship. We call for the earliest possible revocation of this obnoxious proclamation.